The fire came first. It always did in the dreams that haunted Sam Mercer's sleep. But this was no dream. This was the cold reality of space warfare, and the Valdorian Empire was burning. Across the void, warships crumbled like paper caught in a furnace. The Imperial fleet, once the pride of a civilization that had conquered 100 star systems, now scattered like frightened birds before the storm. The Korthax alliance had come with numbers beyond counting their vessels, blotting out the stars themselves, and every tactical display on every remaining Valdorian ship screamed the same terrible truth. This was the end. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, Queen Seraphis gripped her command throne with fingers that had forgotten how to tremble. 200 years of rule had taught her to mask fear behind stone, but even stone could crack. Her daughter stood at the tactical station barking orders to captains who were already dead or dying, and somewhere in the chaos of burning metal and screaming souls, a single human had just done something that made no sense at all. General Krothos hunched over a flickering display, his massive frame casting long shadows across the command center. All positions, report critical failure. We cannot hold. My queen, we must retreat to the inner worlds. Seraphis did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on a small blip moving against the tide of destruction, a tiny transport vessel threading through the wreckage of battle cruisers, heading straight for the heart of the enemy formation. Lyraneth's voice cracked with exhaustion and fury. Mother, the human! He has taken a ship. He is flying toward the Korthax command vessel. I can see. He will die. Yes. The communication channel crackled, and then a voice filled the bridge. It was calm, impossibly calm given the circumstances, carrying the weight of 68 years of life and the quiet acceptance of death. Your Majesty, this is Sam Mercer. I know you can hear me. The Alliance flagship has a weakness in its lower shield array. Your daughter knows the coordinates. When I hit them, you will have exactly 47 seconds to concentrate all remaining firepower on that breach. 47 seconds to end this. General Krothos slammed his fist against the console. This is madness. One human cannot bring down a command ship. One human does not intend to bring it down. Sam's voice remained steady, the voice of a man who had made peace with what came next. One human intends to crack it open. The rest is up to you. Lyraneth's fingers flew across her console, pulling up the data Sam had transmitted. Her face went pale as she processed the numbers, or the trajectory, the terrible simplicity of his plan. Mother, he is right. The shield gap exists. If he detonates inside their hangar bay, the chain reaction will destabilize their entire forward section. And the human, Lyraneth did not answer. She did not need to. Seraphis closed her eyes for the span of a single breath, and in that darkness, she saw 3 years of grief condensed into a single moment. Her daughter had been returned to her by this stranger, this creature from a species her empire had dismissed as insignificant, and now he was about to die so that her world might live. Sam Mercer. Her voice carried across the void, transmitted through channels that connected her to the small craft hurtling toward oblivion. You do not have to do this. With respect, Your Majesty, I really do. A pause, and when he spoke again, something had shifted in his tone. Your daughter told me once that her people believe the worthy dead become stars. I always thought that was a nice idea. Guess I will find out. The transport accelerated its engines, flaring white-hot, as it plunged through a wall of enemy fire. On the bridge of the flagship, every officer watched in silence as a single human did what their entire fleet could not. Tell Lyraneth something for me. Sam's voice was fading now, distorted by interference and distance. Tell her that Marcus would have loved to meet her, and tell her I finally understand what he was trying to teach me. The channel dissolved into static, and then the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as a tiny speck of light collided with the heart of the enemy, and the void erupted in fire. 72 hours earlier, the mop made a wet slapping sound against the metal floor, a rhythm as familiar to Sam Mercer as his own heartbeat. 30 years in the Army had taught him that every task, no matter how small, deserved proper attention. Mopping the corridors of Nexus 7 trading station was not the life he had imagined for himself, but it was the life he had, and a man did not complain about the cards he was dealt. 5:15 in the morning by Earth Standard Time, though the station operated on a 20-hour cycle that still confused his aging body. He had been awake since 4, as he had been every one for the past 15 years. Old habits died hard, and the habits of a combat medic died hardest of all. The corridor stretched before him, empty and gleaming under the harsh artificial lights. Nexus 7 sat at the edge of Valdorian space, a way station for merchants and travelers passing through to the inner worlds. It was a place of constant movement, of species mingling and clashing and trading in 1,000 different currencies. And at its core, it was a place where nobody paid attention to an old human pushing a mop. Sam preferred it that way. His joints ached as he worked the familiar protest of a body that had been pushed too hard for too many years. The desert heat of Kuwait still lived in his bones, along with the shrapnel from a Republican Guard mortar round that had nearly ended his war in '91. He had saved more men than he could count during the ground campaign, carrying them through fire and sand and the screaming chaos of modern warfare. The Army had given him a Bronze Star for that. The Army had also discharged him 6 months later when the nightmares became too frequent and the drinking became too heavy. He did not drink anymore. He had not touched alcohol since the day Marcus died. The thought of his son came unbidden, as it always did, and Sam paused in his work to let the wave of grief wash through him. 15 years since a boy of 12 had closed his eyes in a Valdorian prison cell and never opened them again. 15 years since Sam had held his child's body and screamed at guards who did not understand human tears. 15 years since his world had ended, and yet here he was, still breathing, still moving, still pushing a mop across floors that would be dirty again by nightfall. Marcus would have found humor in that. His boy had always been able to laugh at the absurd, even when they were huddled together in that cold cell, waiting for each day to bring either rescue or death. Sam reached into his pocket and touched the photograph he carried there. The edges were worn soft from years of handling, the image faded but still clear enough to show a dark-haired boy with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. Marcus, at 10 years old, standing in front of their house in Amarillo, Texas, grinning at the camera like he had just discovered the secret to eternal happiness. 2 years after that photograph was taken, a Valdorian survey ship had landed in the desert outside of town. The official story called it a research expedition, a scientific mission to study primitive planetary species. The truth was simpler and uglier. The Valdorians needed test subjects for a new medical technology, and humans were abundant and expendable. Sam and Marcus had been camping in the Palo Duro Canyon when the ship found them, father and son alone in the wilderness, far from any witnesses. The perfect specimens. He still remembered the way Marcus had looked at the alien vessel descending from the sky, not with fear, but with wonder. His boy had always been fascinated by the stars, always dreaming of the day humanity would reach beyond its cradle and join the greater community of intelligent life. He had never imagined that first contact would come with restraints and needles in a cage barely large enough for a grown man to lie down. The Valdorian prison had been clean and efficient, as all Valdorian things were. The guards did not abuse them, did not torture them, did not seem to feel anything at all about the creatures in their care. Sam and Marcus were simply resources, biological material, to be processed and studied and eventually discarded. The fact that they could speak, could think, could love and grieve and dream meant nothing to their captors. Marcus had been the one to keep hope alive. Even as the months stretched into years, even as Orm felt his own spirit crumbling under the weight of helplessness, his son had refused to surrender. He had learned phrases of the Valdorian language, had studied the patterns of the guards, had drawn elaborate escape plans in the dust of their cell floor. "We will get out of here, Dad." Those words, spoken in the darkness of another sleepless night, had become Marcus's mantra. "And when we do, we will tell everyone what happened. We will make sure it never happens to anyone else." But the Valdorians did not provide adequate medical care for their human specimens. And a respiratory infection that would have been trivial on Earth became a death sentence in the sterile corridors of an alien prison. Sam had watched his son's breathing grow labored over the course of 3 days, had begged the guards for medicine, in a language they pretended not to understand, had finally held Marcus in his arms as the boy's lungs filled with fluid and his heart gave out. The last words his son ever spoke still echoed in Sam's memory, clear as the day they were uttered. "Don't hate them, Dad. They just don't understand us. When you get out of here, teach them. Make them understand." Sam had escaped 8 months later during a prisoner transfer that went wrong in ways the Valdorians had not anticipated. He had killed 3 guards with his bare hands, had stolen a shuttle, had fled into the depths of space with nothing but the clothes on his back and a photograph of a dead boy pressed against his heart. 15 years of running, 15 years of hiding on stations and outposts at the fringes of civilization, 15 years of pushing mops and cleaning toilets and watching the Valdorian Empire go about its business, never knowing that one of its escaped specimens lived among them, learning their ways, studying their weaknesses, waiting for something he could not name. Marcus had asked him not to hate. Most days Sam managed to honor that request. On the bad days, the hate was all that kept him moving. The sound of footsteps broke through his reverie, and Sam looked up to see a group of young Valdorians approaching down the corridor. There were four of them, tall and angular, their skin the pale blue-gray that marked their species, their eyes carrying the casual arrogance of those who had never known weakness or want. Station security uniforms marked them as low-ranking guards barely out of their equivalent of adolescence, full of the cruelty that came so easily to the young and powerful. Sam kept his head down and continued mopping. The leader of the group stopped directly in front of him, forcing Sam to either halt his work or bump into the Valdorian's legs. "Look at this creature. I have heard that humans can be trained to perform simple tasks, but I never believed it until now." Laughter from the others, sharp and mocking. Another guard, this one with distinctive scarring that marked participation in some minor military campaign, stepped closer. "Perhaps we should test its training. I have heard they make amusing sounds when frightened." Sam said nothing. His hands tightened on the mop handle, but his face remained blank. This was not the first time he had been harassed by young Valdorians with too much authority and too little supervision. It would not be the last. "It does not respond." The leader loomed over Sam with the casual dominance of a predator playing with prey. "Perhaps it is defective. The old ones often are." Sam kept his voice low, deferential, exactly the tone that humans were expected to use in Valdorian space. "Please, I am only trying to do my work. I mean no disrespect." "It speaks." Mock surprise rippled through the group. "And so politely. Someone has trained this one well." A foot lashed out, catching the mop bucket and sending dirty water splashing across the freshly cleaned floor. Sam watched the gray liquid spread across the metal, seeping into corners he would now have to clean again, and felt something old and dangerous stir in his chest. Not yet, he told himself. Not for this. Save it for something that matters. The leader grinned, revealing teeth slightly too sharp for human comfort. Now you have more work to do. You should thank us for providing you with purpose. The guards laughed again, and then they were moving on their entertainment, concluded, already forgetting the old human they had humiliated. Sam watched them go, his knuckles white around the mop handle, his breath coming slow and controlled in the way he had learned during years of combat training. A voice spoke from behind him, gravelly with age. "Why did you not strike back?" Sam turned to find an elderly Valdorian watching him from a doorway. This one was different from the young guards, stooped with years, his skin faded to a pale silver, his eyes holding the weight of experiences that had ground away the sharp edges of youth. Would it have changed anything? The old alien considered this, then slowly shook his head. No. They would have reported you, and you would have been ejected from the station. Perhaps worse. Then you have your answer. But you wanted to. It was not a question. I saw it in your eyes. You have fought before human. You know how to kill. Sam turned back to his work, beginning the slow process of mopping up the spilled water. I have killed enough. Now I just want to be left alone. That is not peace, the old Valdorian's voice carried a strange note of recognition. That is just a different kind of war. Before Sam could respond, a sound cut through the station's ambient noise. An alarm, sharp and urgent, echoing through every corridor and chamber. Emergency channels crackled to life, and suddenly the air was full of voices speaking rapid Valdorian, too fast for Sam to follow completely. But one phrase came through, clearly repeated again and again with increasing urgency. Royal emergency signal. Royal emergency signal detected in restricted sector. The old Valdorian's eyes went wide. The royal house. Something has happened. Sam felt something shift in his chest, a stirring of the instincts that 15 years of hiding had never managed to bury. Emergency signals meant chaos. Chaos meant opportunity. An opportunity for a man who had spent more than a decade studying Valdorian systems. From the shadows meant the possibility of answers to questions he had not even known he was asking. He set down his mop and moved toward the nearest public information terminal. The station's main plaza was already crowded when Sam arrived, dozens of species pressing together as they tried to access news feeds and communications channels. Rumors flew through the air in a babble of languages, each more outlandish than the last. The queen had been assassinated. The princess had returned from the dead. The Korthax alliance had declared war. All three at once. Sam pushed his way through the crowd until he reached a terminal that was not yet occupied. His fingers moved across the interface with practiced familiarity, accessing channels that a simple cleaning worker should not have known existed. 15 years of observation had taught him every backdoor and vulnerability in the Valdorian information network. He had never used that knowledge for anything except survival. Until now. The data that scrolled across his screen made his blood run cold. 3 years ago, Princess Lyraneth of the Valdorian Empire had led a fleet into battle against Korthax raiders. Her ship had been destroyed, her body never recovered, and the entire empire had mourned their fallen heir. Queen Seraphis had retreated into grief, and the great civilization that had once dominated this sector of the galaxy had begun its slow slide toward dissolution. But now a signal had been detected at the edge of Valdorian space, a signal carrying the royal family's personal encryption. And alongside that encryption, woven into the carrier wave like a ghost from another life, was a prisoner identification code that Sam recognized instantly. It was his own code. The number that had been tattooed on his arm 15 years ago in a prison that he still saw in his nightmares. Someone was using his prisoner code to send a message through Valdorian space. Sam stared at the screen, his mind racing through possibilities. A trap, obviously. Someone had learned of his escape, had discovered his identity, and was now using his old codes to lure him into the open. That was the logical explanation. That was what any rational person would believe. But the signal also carried the royal encryption, and that could not be faked. The Valdorian royal family guarded their codes with the same ferocity that Earth nations guarded nuclear launch sequences. No forger, no matter how skilled, could replicate that signature, which meant that whoever was sending this signal had access to both the royal encryption and Sam's prisoner code, which meant that somehow, impossibly, those two things had come together in the same place at the same time at the edge of known space. He thought of Marcus lying in his arms as life faded from his young eyes. He thought of the promise he had made to his dying son, the promise to teach instead of hate, to build bridges instead of walls. And he thought of the mop still lying on the floor of a corridor that would never know his name. 2 hours later, Sam Mercer was aboard a stolen shuttle flying toward coordinates that should have led to nothing but empty space and certain death. The photograph of Marcus rested against his chest, a talisman against the darkness that waited ahead. He did not know what he would find. He did not know if he would survive to find it. But for the first time in 15 years, Sam Mercer felt something that might have been hope. The wreckage field stretched across 1,000 kilometers of void, the scattered remains of what had once been a Valdorian battlecruiser. Sam navigated through the debris with careful precision, his stolen shuttle's sensors sweeping for any sign of life among the twisted metal and frozen atmosphere. The signal was coming from somewhere in the heart of the field, growing stronger as he approached. Royal encryption prisoner code, and now a third element that his sensors were just beginning to detect. Life signs. Faint, irregular, but unmistakably present. Someone was still alive in there. Sam brought his shuttle alongside a section of hull that still held atmosphere, a fragment of the ship's command section that had somehow survived the destruction that had consumed the rest. His docking procedures were rough. The shuttle not designed for this kind of precision work, but the magnetic seals held and the airlock pressurized without incident. He drew the sidearm he had stolen along with the shuttle, a Valdorian pulse pistol that felt awkward in his human hands, but would serve its purpose if needed. Then he cycled the airlock and stepped into the darkness of the ruined ship. The emergency lights had failed long ago, but his suit's integrated illumination cut through the gloom, revealing corridors that had been beautiful once. Valdorian architecture favored flowing lines and organic shapes. Walls that curved like living things, surfaces that caught and reflected light in patterns meant to soothe the soul. Now those walls were scarred with blast marks and structural damage, and the only reflection was the gleam of his own light on dried blood. He followed the life signs through the maze of wreckage, climbing over collapsed bulkheads and squeezing through gaps that barely accommodated his aging frame. The work was harder than it should have been. his body protesting every movement, but Sam had learned long ago that pain was merely information, a signal to be acknowledged and then set aside. The signal led him to what had once been the ship's medical bay, now a tomb of shattered equipment and scattered debris. And there, slumped against the far wall, was the source of the life signs he had been tracking. She was Valdorian, that much was clear, even through the damage her body had sustained. Tall and angular, her skin, the deep blue that marked the royal bloodline, her features carrying the distinctive bone structure of the ruling house. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood, both red and the darker shade that Valdorians carried in their veins, and her breathing was shallow, labored the breath of someone who had been fighting death for far too long. Sam holstered his weapon and knelt beside her, his medic's training taking over, despite the years since he had last used it. Pulse weak but present, respiration compromised by what looked like a punctured lung, multiple lacerations and at least 2 broken bones visible through the torn uniform. Dehydration, severe blood loss, critical, and yet somehow she was still alive. "Can you hear me?" The words felt strange in his mouth, the first time he had spoken Valdorian outside of necessity in longer than he could remember. But they had their effect. The woman's eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with difficulty, and then widening as she registered what she was seeing. A human. Here in the wreckage of her ship, kneeling beside her with medical supplies already emerging from his pack. Her hand moved faster than he would have thought possible given her condition, closing around his wrist with surprising strength. Her other hand found a blade that had been hidden beneath her body, bringing it up to rest against his throat. "Who are you?" Not a question. A demand delivered in a voice that cracked with pain but still carried the unmistakable tone of command. Sam did not try to pull away. He met her eyes steadily, letting her see him clearly for what he was. "My name is Sam Mercer. I am human. I am 68 years old, and I came here because someone was using my prisoner code to send a signal." The blade pressed harder against his skin, just enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Your prisoner code. You were held by my people. 15 years ago, my son died in that prison. I escaped, and now you have come to finish your revenge." Sam shook his head slowly, careful not to move too much with the blade still at his throat. "If I wanted revenge, I would have let you die. The life signs on my scanner were almost too faint to detect. Another hour, maybe 2, and there would have been nothing to find." The woman studied him, her eyes searching his face for deception. Sam let her look, let her see the grief that he carried, always the weight of years and loss that had carved lines into his features. "White boy." The blade did not waver, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "Why save me after what my people did to you?" "Because my son asked me not to hate." The words came out before Sam could stop them, pulled from a place he rarely visited anymore. He was 12 years old when he died, and his last words were a request that I teach your people instead of destroy them. I have spent 15 years running from that request. I guess I finally got tired of running. Something shifted in the woman's eyes. The blade lowered slowly until it rested against her chest instead of his throat. "You are either the bravest human I have ever encountered or the most foolish." "Probably both." Sam reached for his medical kit, moving slowly so she could see every motion. "Now will you let me treat your wounds? Because that punctured lung is going to kill you in about 4 hours if we do not do something about it." For a long moment she simply stared at him. Then, with a sound that might have been a laugh if she had had the breath for it, she let the blade fall from her fingers. "I am Lyraneth, Princess of the Valdorian Empire, heir to the eternal throne." "I know who you are." Sam opened his kit and began preparing his instruments. "I recognize the royal encryption in your signal. What I do not know is how you got my prisoner code." The princess closed her eyes as he began to work, wincing at the pain but not crying out. Valdorians were stoic by nature, trained from birth to endure without complaint. And even in her weakened state, Lyraneth maintained that discipline. 3 years ago, my ship was attacked. Not by the Korthax as my people believe, but by vessels that should not have existed. Ships that carried Valdorian military transponders but fought with tactics no Valdorian would use. Someone inside your empire wanted you dead. Yes. The word came out as a hiss as Sam began the delicate process of sealing her lung. "I have spent 3 years piecing together the evidence, hiding from those who hunted me, waiting for a chance to return home. But I knew that if I used the royal encryption alone, whoever wanted me dead would intercept the signal before it reached my mother. So you needed something else, something that would attract attention without triggering the normal channels. I found records of escaped prisoners in an old database, humans who had been taken for experimentation and later fled. Most of the codes were useless, belonging to those who had died or been recaptured. But one code belonged to a man who had been seen multiple times at the edge of our space, always moving, never staying long enough to be captured. Sam paused in his work, looking down at the princess with new understanding. You were trying to find me. I was trying to find anyone who might help. The code was a message in a bottle thrown into the void with no certainty that anyone would receive it. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. And yet here you are, the man whose son died in our prison, saving the life of a princess who represents everything he should hate. I told you my son asked me not to hate. That is not an answer, that is an excuse. Sam finished sealing her lung and moved on to the lacerations that covered her arms and torso. His hands worked with the automatic precision of decades of training, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over her words. Maybe it is, he admitted finally. Maybe I have been using my son's dying wish as a shield against the world. But the fact remains that I am here, and you are alive, and in a few hours you will be strong enough to travel. Travel where my enemies control the approaches to the homeworld. Any ship I take will be destroyed before it reaches the inner systems. Then we do not take the main approaches. The princess stared at him, waiting for more. Sam allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine expression of anything resembling humor he had felt in years. I have spent 15 years studying your people. I know your shipping routes, your patrol schedules, your communication protocols. I know which sectors are watched and which ones are forgotten. And I know a dozen ways in a Valdorian space that your military has never even considered. You learned all of this to plan your revenge. I learned all of this because I did not know what else to do with myself. Revenge was always an option, but it was never a plan. Lyraneth was silent for a long moment, processing his words. Then slowly she extended her hand toward him. In Valdorian culture, Sam knew this gesture carried enormous significance. It was an offer of partnership, of trust, of shared fate. Sam Mercer, you have saved my life when you had every reason to wish me dead. I cannot promise you anything except more danger and the possibility of a death far from your home. But I offer you my hand and my word that if we survive this, your son's memory will be honored in the halls of my ancestors. Sam looked at her hand, at the blood still staining her fingers, at the scars that told stories of battles fought and survived. He thought of Marcus, who had believed that understanding could bridge any gap. He thought of the mop lying on the floor of Nexus 7, the life of quiet invisibility that he had built for himself. Then he reached out and clasped her hand. I stopped being afraid of death a long time ago, Your Highness, and I stopped caring about honor even before that. But I will help you get home, and I will help you find whoever tried to kill you. And if it turns out that my knowledge can save your people instead of destroying them, then maybe my son was right all along. Lyraneth's grip tightened on his hand, and for the first time since he had found her, something like hope flickered in her eyes. Then let us begin. The journey to Valdorian space took 2 weeks, the longest 14 days of Sam's life since the death of his son. Lyraneth healed slowly, her body fighting against the damage it had sustained, while Sam navigated through shipping lanes and patrol zones that no human had ever crossed willingly. They talked during the long hours between star systems, trading stories in the darkness of the stolen shuttle's cramped cabin. Sam learned of Lyraneth's childhood in the crystal gardens of the imperial palace, of her mother's strict demands and her father's gentle wisdom. He learned of battles she had fought and lives she had taken, of the weight of a crown she had never asked to wear. And Lyraneth learned of Earth of Texas heat and canyon walls painted red by ancient rivers, of a boy who had loved the stars and a father who had loved him more than anything in the universe. Marcus sounds like someone I would have been honored to know. Lyraneth's voice was soft in the darkness of the cabin, her breathing finally steady after days of labored gasps. He carried wisdom beyond his years. He was 12. The words caught in Sam's throat. He should have been worried about homework and baseball games. Instead, he spent his last years in a cage, dying of a disease that any hospital on Earth could have cured in a week. And yet he asked you not to hate. That was Marcus. He always saw the best in people, even when there was no best to see. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of the shuttle's engines and the distant pulse of stars. Lyraneth's voice cut through the darkness. I will not insult you by apologizing for what my people did. Apologies cannot bring back the dead, and I was not responsible for the policies that led to your son's imprisonment. But I will tell you this, Sam Mercer. When I take the throne, the practice of taking primitive species for experimentation will end. Not because I fear human revenge or seek to appease your grief, but because Marcus was right. We do not understand your people, and understanding begins with respect. Sam said nothing for a long time. Then quietly he reached into his pocket and withdrew the photograph of his son. He would have liked you. Marcus always had a thing for strong women. A surprised laugh escaped Lyraneth. The first genuine sound of joy Sam had heard from her since they met. I am 93 years old, Sam. By human standards, I am ancient. By human standards, you look about 35. Marcus would have been fascinated. And you, what do you see when you look at me? Sam considered the question carefully. I see a woman who has survived 3 years alone in the void. I see a warrior who refused to die even when death was the easier choice. And I see a princess who might actually be worth saving. High praise from a man who has every reason to wish my species extinct. I never wished you extinct. I wished you understood. There is a difference. The shuttle emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Valdorian territory, and the conversation ended as they both turned their attention to the task at hand. The Imperial homeworld lay 3 days distant, accessible only through a labyrinth of patrol zones and security checkpoints that would destroy any unauthorized vessel on sight. But Sam had spent 15 years mapping those patrols, learning their patterns, identifying their blind spots. And Lyraneth, despite her injuries, still carried the royal encryption that could open doors no outsider should ever have been able to approach. Together they slipped through the Empire's defenses like ghosts, leaving no trace of their passage, drawing no attention from the countless ships that guarded the approaches to the throne world. On the third day, as the planet itself came into view, Lyraneth gripped Sam's arm with sudden intensity. There. She pointed at the view screen at a formation of warships clustered around a space station that gleamed like a jewel against the darkness. That is the capital. That is home. Sam looked at the display at the weapons platforms and patrol vessels that could reduce their shuttle to atoms in seconds, and felt something he had not expected. Fear, yes, but also excitement, and beneath both a quiet certainty that whatever happened next, Marcus would finally have his answer. The shuttle descended toward the Imperial docks, carrying a dead princess and an escaped human prisoner back into the heart of the Empire that had condemned them both. Above them, the palace towers reached toward the stars, and somewhere in those crystal halls, a grieving queen was about to receive the shock of her 200-year life. The docking procedures took less than an hour thanks to Lyraneth's royal codes and the confusion that her sudden reappearance caused among the port authorities. Word spread through the capital with the speed of light, and by the time the shuttle's ramp lowered to the deck, a crowd of thousands had gathered to witness the impossible. Princess Lyraneth, daughter of Queen Seraphis, heir to the eternal throne, had returned from the dead. She walked down the ramp slowly, her wounds still healing, her uniform still stained with the blood of her long ordeal. Behind her, one step to her left, walked Sam Mercer, the human who had brought her home. The crowd fell silent as they emerged. Valdorians were not accustomed to the presence of humans in their midst, and this human walked not as a prisoner or a specimen, but as an equal beside their future queen. Whispers rippled through the assembled masses, fear and confusion, and something that might have been wonder. And then the crowd parted, and Queen Seraphis herself emerged from the ranks of guards and nobles who surrounded her. She was everything Sam had expected, and nothing he could have imagined. Tall, regal, her bearing carrying the weight of 2 centuries of absolute rule. Her face was carved from the same stone that had built empires and destroyed worlds, revealing nothing of the emotions that must have been tearing through her soul. But her eyes told a different story. Her eyes fixed on her daughter's face burned with a grief so profound that even Sam, standing at Lyraneth's side, felt its heat. Lyraneth's voice cracked the mask of royal composure, finally slipping. Mother, I have returned. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Queen Seraphis did not move. Then, with a motion that made every guard in the plaza reach for their weapons, she stepped forward and embraced her daughter. The crowd gasped. In 200 years of rule, Queen Seraphis had never shown public affection for anyone. The Valdorian code demanded strength above all composure in the face of any emotion, the appearance of invulnerability at all times. But Mother's Sam knew answered to a different code. The Queen's voice was barely above a whisper meant for her daughter's ears alone. But Sam, standing close enough to touch them both, heard every word. You live, and I have spent 3 years preparing to die. I am sorry, Mother. I could not risk a signal until I was certain it would reach you. The Queen pulled back her hand, still gripping Liraneth's shoulders, her eyes searching her daughter's face. Who did this? Who attacked your ship? Who left you for dead? I do not know yet, but I will find out. Liraneth turned slightly, gesturing toward Sam. This human saved my life. Without him, I would have died in the wreckage of my ship. The Queen's gaze shifted to Sam, and he felt the weight of it like a physical force. This was a woman who had ruled an empire with an iron will, who had made decisions that affected billions of lives, who had watched stars born and die during her long reign. And now she was looking at him, a 68-year-old human with a mop bucket waiting for him on a space station at the edge of her territory. You saved my daughter. Not a question. A statement delivered with the same absolute certainty that characterized everything about Queen Seraphis. Yes, Your Majesty. Why? Sam met her eyes without flinching. He had faced Republican Guard positions in the desert, had survived 3 years in a Valdorian prison, had spent 15 years running from a grief that should have destroyed him. The weight of a queen's gaze was nothing compared to that. Because my son asked me to, and because it was the right thing to do. The Queen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her guards and spoke 3 words that would change the course of galactic history. Bring him inside. The palace corridors stretched before Sam like the arteries of some vast living creature, walls of crystal and light that hummed with energy older than human civilization. Guards flanked him on every side, their weapons not quite pointed at his chest, but close enough to make the message clear. He was tolerated here, not welcomed. The difference mattered. Liraneth walked ahead with her mother, their voices too low for Sam to catch, but their body language spoke volumes. The princess kept glancing back at him, checking that he still followed, while the Queen's spine remained rigid with the discipline of centuries. Whatever reunion was happening between mother and daughter, it was not the tearful embrace that human families might have shared. Valdorians processed grief differently, Sam had learned. They buried it deep and let it fuel them. The throne room doors opened without sound, revealing a space that defied human comprehension. The ceiling soared so high that clouds actually formed near its apex, wisps of vapor, catching light from crystalline structures that might have been chandeliers or living organisms, or something else entirely. The floor beneath Sam's feet was transparent, showing layer after layer of machinery and architecture descending into depths he could not measure. And at the far end, raised on a platform of what looked like solidified starlight, sat the eternal throne of the Valdorian Empire. Queen Seraphis ascended the steps to her seat of power, her movements carrying the weight of ritual performed countless times over 2 centuries. She did not sit immediately, instead turning to face the chamber, where her advisors and generals were already gathering, summoned by news that had spread through the capital faster than light. Sam found himself guided to a position near the base of the throne platform, close enough to hear, but clearly separated from the Valdorians who belonged here. He did not mind. He had spent 15 years perfecting the art of being present without being noticed. My daughter has returned. The Queen's voice filled the chamber without apparent effort, a trick of acoustics or technology that Sam did not understand. 3 years we mourned her as dead. 3 years our enemies grew bold while we grew weak. That time is ended. Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles and military officers, too many voices speaking at once for Sam to follow. But he caught fragments enough to understand the shock that was spreading through the Valdorian leadership. The heir had returned. The succession was secure. Everything had changed in the span of a single hour. She did not return alone. The Queen's gaze swept the chamber and settled on Sam with an intensity that made his skin prickle. A human brought her home. A human who was once our prisoner, who escaped our custody, who had every reason to wish us harm. The murmurs turned to something darker. Sam felt hostile eyes pressing against him from every direction, the weight of centuries of Valdorian superiority focused on a single point. He kept his face blank and his hands visible, the posture of a man who knew he was surrounded but refused to show fear. I wish to hear his account. The queen raised one hand, silencing the chamber. Sam Mercer of Earth, you will tell us how you came to save my daughter. Sam stepped forward, aware of every weapon tracking his movement. His voice came out steadier than he expected, the voice of a man who had briefed generals and comforted dying soldiers in equal measure. 3 weeks ago, I was working as a maintenance technician on Nexus 7 station. I detected an emergency signal carrying both your royal encryption and a prisoner identification code that I recognize as my own. A voice from the assembled officers cut through the air, sharp with suspicion. Sam identified the speaker as a massive Valdorian in military dress, his uniform heavy with medals and rank insignia. General Krothos, if Sam's research was accurate, commander of the Imperial fleet and no friend to humans. Your own code. You expect us to believe this coincidence. I was captured 15 years ago along with my son. We were held for 3 years before I escaped. My son did not survive the imprisonment. Sam kept his voice flat, stating facts rather than accusations. When I saw my code embedded in a royal signal, I investigated. I found Princess Lyraneth in the wreckage of a battlecruiser, badly wounded but alive. General Krothos stepped forward, his bulk casting a shadow that seemed to swallow light. And you saved her, a human saving Valdorian royalty. Forgive my skepticism, but this strains belief. I was a combat medic in my planet's military. I served in a war called Desert Storm, treating wounded soldiers under fire. The princess's injuries were severe, but not beyond my training. The general spat the word like a curse. Training. Humans are barely capable of leaving their own gravity well. What training could possibly qualify you to treat one of our kind? The training that saved dozens of men during 3 days of continuous combat in the desert. Sam met the general's eyes without flinching. The training that let me escape your prison after 3 years of captivity. The training that brought your princess home when your entire empire believed she was dead. Silence fell across the throne room. General Krothos's face contorted with barely contained rage, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. The human speaks truth. All eyes turned to Princess Lyraneth, who had taken a position beside her mother's throne. She stood straight despite the wounds that Sam knew were still healing beneath her uniform, her voice carrying the same effortless authority as the Queen's. I would have died in that wreckage without his intervention. My lung was punctured, my blood loss critical, and I had been drifting for nearly a week before his shuttle found me. He had every opportunity to leave me there, to let me die, as payment for what our people did to his son. Instead, he spent 2 weeks nursing me back to health while navigating us through hostile space. A new voice emerged, this one belonging to a tall, angular Valdorian whose robes marked him as a civilian advisor rather than military. Sam recognized the type immediately, the politician who survived by reading currents of power rather than creating them. Hostile space. You speak of our own territory as hostile, Highness. I speak of the ships that attacked me 3 years ago, Lord Vexar. Lyraneth's voice hardened. Ships that carried Valdorian military transponders but fought with tactics no Valdorian would use. Ships that knew exactly where my fleet would be and exactly how to destroy it. When the chamber erupted, accusations flew between factions that Sam could not identify, old grievances surfacing in the case of revelation. Through it all, Queen Seraphis sat motionless on her throne, watching her court tear itself apart with eyes that betrayed nothing. Sam used the confusion to study the faces around him, cataloging reactions and responses. Most of the military officers seemed genuinely shocked by Lyraneth's accusation, their anger directed outward at the unknown enemy who had dared strike at their princess. But a few faces showed something different: calculation, concern, the expressions of those who had something to hide. Lord Vexar was one of them. The advisor's face had gone carefully blank the moment Lyraneth mentioned the attack, a studied neutrality that screamed guilt to anyone trained to read such things. Sam filed the observation away, adding it to the mental dossier he had been building since setting foot in the palace. Queen Seraphis's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Enough, my daughter speaks of treachery within our borders. This is a matter that requires investigation, not debate. Until we know more, the human will remain in the palace under guard. General Krothos stepped forward again, his voice tight with controlled fury. Your Majesty, Surely you cannot mean to house this creature within our walls. He is an escaped prisoner, a member of a species we have classified as primitive. His presence here is an insult to everything we represent. His presence here saved my daughter's life. The Queen's voice did not rise, but something in its tone made the general take a step back. That is a debt I do not take lightly, General. He will be treated as a guest of the royal house until I decide otherwise. The words carried finality that brooked no argument. General Crothos bowed stiffly and retreated, but his eyes found Sam's across the chamber, promising a reckoning that the Queen's protection would not prevent forever. Sam returned the look without expression. He had faced worse than angry generals in his time. The chambers they gave him were larger than any space Sam had occupied since leaving Earth, a suite of rooms that seemed designed to remind him how small he was compared to the beings who built them. The ceiling rose 3 meters above his head, the furniture scaled for Valdorian frames, the bed so vast he could have stretched out twice over and still not reached its edges. He sat on the edge of that bed as night fell over the capital, watching through crystal windows as the lights of a civilization older than human history flickered to life across the cityscape below. Somewhere out there, beings were living their lives without any knowledge of the events unfolding in the palace above them. They did not know that their princess had returned, that their empire might be harboring traitors, that a human was sleeping in rooms reserved for visiting dignitaries. They did not know that everything was about to change. A chime at the door pulled Sam from his thoughts. He rose expecting guards or servants and found instead Princess Larineth standing in the corridor with an expression he could not read. "May I enter?" Sam stepped aside without a word. The princess moved past him into the chamber, her movements still careful, protecting wounds that had not fully healed. She stopped at the window, staring out at the same cityscape that had held Sam's attention moments before. "My mother is afraid." The words came without preamble, cutting straight to the heart of things. She would never admit it, but I can see the fear behind her eyes. 3 years of believing me dead, and now this. The revelation that someone within our own borders tried to kill me. It shakes the foundation of everything she has built. Fear is a reasonable response to betrayal. Fear is weakness. That is what she taught me, what every Valdorian is taught from birth. We do not feel fear. We do not show doubt. We are the masters of 100 star systems, and our enemies tremble at our approach. Larineth laughed, a sound without humor. Lies. All of it lies we tell ourselves to feel strong. Sam joined her at the window, maintaining enough distance to respect the boundaries between them. Every civilization tells itself lies. The question is whether those lies serve a purpose. What lies does humanity tell itself? That we are special, that our little blue planet matters in a universe that barely notices we exist, that love and courage and sacrifice mean something in the face of entropy and time. Sam shrugged. Useful lies mostly. They get us through the dark nights. Your son, Marcus. Larineth turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. He believed those lies. He believed in people, in the idea that understanding could bridge any gap, heal any wound. He believed that if we just tried hard enough, we could make enemies into friends and strangers into family. Sam's voice caught slightly. He died still believing that. And you believe it? The question hung between them, weighted with implications that went far beyond idle curiosity. Sam considered his answer carefully, aware that whatever he said would shape the future in ways he could not predict. I believe my son was wiser than I am. I believe he saw something in people that I have spent my whole life missing. And I believe that if there is any chance he was right, I owe it to him to find out. Larineth nodded slowly, accepting his words. Then let us hope he was right, because if there are traitors within my mother's court, we will need all the wisdom we can find to root them out. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. The time I shared with you in the shuttle. I did not tell you everything about my years in that wreckage. Sam waited. There were moments when I wanted to die, when the pain was too much and the loneliness too deep, and I thought that closing my eyes and letting go would be easier than fighting for another breath. She did not turn to face him. Your prisoner code saved more than my life, Sam Mercer. It gave me a reason to hold on. The idea that somewhere out there a human had survived what we had done to him, had found the strength to keep living, despite everything we took from him. It reminded me that survival is always possible, even when it seems like madness. The door closed behind her before Sam could respond. He stood at the window for a long time after she left, watching the lights of an alien civilization and thinking about the strange paths that brought people together across the vast emptiness of space. Morning came with the sound of alarms. Sam was on his feet before the first wail finished echoing through the palace corridors, his combat training overriding the grogginess of interrupted sleep. He had fallen asleep in his clothes, a habit born from years of never knowing when danger might strike, and now he blessed that paranoia as he moved toward the door. The corridor outside was chaos. Guards sprinted past in formation, their weapons drawn, their voices shouting orders in rapid Valdorian that Sam struggled to follow. Something about intruders, something about the royal chambers, something about blood. He caught the arm of a passing guard, a young Valdorian whose eyes were wide with fear despite his training. "What is happening?" "Assassins." The word came out in a gasp. "They have breached the inner palace. The queen and princess are under attack." The guard tore free and continued running, leaving Sam standing in the corridor with a choice to make. He was unarmed, unfamiliar with the palace layout, and clearly not wanted in whatever battle was unfolding. The smart thing to do would be to stay in his chambers and wait for the situation to resolve itself. Sam had never been particularly good at doing the smart thing. He followed the sounds of combat through corridors that twisted and branched in patterns that seemed designed to confuse intruders. The Valdorian architecture that had seemed beautiful by daylight now felt like a maze wall shifting color as emergency systems activated lighting, changing from the gentle glow of evening to the harsh red of combat alert. The first body he found was a palace guard slumped against a wall with a wound in his chest that no medic could have saved. Sam knelt beside him long enough to confirm death, then moved on his eyes, scanning for weapons or tools he could use. The second body gave him what he needed. A fallen guard had dropped his sidearm in the struggle, a Valdorian pulse pistol of the same model Sam had stolen weeks ago. He checked the charge, found it nearly full, and continued toward the sounds of fighting. The royal chambers were a battleground. Sam emerged from a side corridor to find a scene of controlled chaos, guards engaging attackers in the close quarters combat that Valdorians called the Dance of Blades. The assassins were good, their movements precise and economical, their weapons finding gaps in the guards' defenses with surgical accuracy. But they were not Valdorian. Sam recognized the fighting style immediately, the brutal efficiency that prioritized results over elegance. These were human movements adapted to Valdorian bodies, taught by someone who understood that in real combat, honor was a luxury and survival was the only goal. He had taught that style himself long ago in a desert on the other side of the galaxy. The recognition froze him for a split second, and in that moment, one of the assassins spotted him. The attacker broke from engagement with the guard and charged, blade flashing in the red emergency light, closing the distance faster than Sam's aging body could retreat. Training took over. Sam did not try to match the assassin's speed or strength. Instead, he waited until the last possible moment, then stepped sideways and brought the pulse pistol up in a motion that bypassed conscious thought entirely. The shot took the assassin in the throat, dropping him mid-stride. Sam did not pause to confirm the kill. He was already moving the pistol, tracking for new targets, his feet carrying him toward the cluster of guards protecting a doorway that had to lead to the royal chambers. One of the guards spotted him raising a weapon. "Human, stop where you are." "I am on your side." Sam kept the pistol pointed at the floor, showing no threat. "The princess knows me. I can help. You can help by staying out of the way." A scream from inside the royal chambers cut off any response. Sam recognized the voice, had heard it just hours ago in his own quarters, sharing secrets and fears in the darkness. Larineth was in trouble. He did not make a conscious decision to move. One moment he was standing before the guard, the next he was through the doorway, his body acting on instincts that his mind had not yet processed. The royal chambers were vast, cluttered with furniture and decorative objects that provided cover for both defenders and attackers. Sam took it all in with a single sweep of his eyes, identifying positions and threats, the way he had learned in a war fought before most of these Valdorians were born. 3 assassins remained engaged with palace guards in a battle that was quickly turning against the defenders. The queen stood near the far wall, her back against a pillar, a blade in her hand that she clearly knew how to use. And beside her, blood streaming from a wound in her arm, Princess Lyraneth fought with the desperate fury of someone who knew that failure meant death. Sam raised his pistol and fired. The first shot took an assassin in the back, dishonorable in any culture, but irrelevant when lives hung in the balance. The second shot went wide as the target dodged, anticipating the attack with reflexes that seemed almost precognitive. The third shot hit home, dropping another enemy and evening the odds. The remaining assassin turned to face this new threat, and Sam found himself staring into eyes that held no fear, no hesitation, no humanity at all, despite the Valdorian body that housed them. Human. The word came out flat, curious. You fight like one of ours. I fight like someone who wants to live. Sam kept his pistol trained on center mass. Your friends are dead. Surrender and you might survive this. The assassin laughed, a sound that chilled Sam's blood. We do not surrender. We complete our missions, or we die trying. The attack came faster than Sam could track the assassin, closing the distance in a blur of movement that should have been impossible. Sam fired twice, missing both times, and then the blade was coming for his throat, and he knew he was going to die. The shot that saved his life came from behind him. The assassin staggered, a hole in his chest where his heart should have been, and collapsed at Sam's feet. Sam spun to find General Krothos standing in the doorway, a massive pulse rifle still smoking in his hands. You fight well for a primitive. The general's voice carried grudging respect. Perhaps there is more to humans than I believed. Before Sam could respond, a cry of pain drew his attention back to the royal family. Princess Lyraneth had fallen to her knees, her arm wound bleeding freely, her face pale with shock and blood loss. Queen Seraphis knelt beside her for once, allowing emotion to show on her features, her hands pressing against the wound with desperate pressure. Sam moved without thinking, crossing the chamber to kneel at Lyraneth's side. His medical training took over, assessing the wound with automatic precision. The blade nicked an artery. She needs pressure and elevation now. He did not wait for permission, simply took control, his hands replacing the queen's on the wound. General, I need cloth for bandages and something to use as a tourniquet. Move. To his credit, General Krothos did not argue. Within seconds, Sam had what he needed, and he worked with focused intensity. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Lyraneth's color began to return. She will live. Sam sat back on his heels, suddenly aware of how tired he was. But she needs proper medical attention, not battlefield first aid. Queen Seraphis looked at him, and for the first time since he had arrived, her mask of royal composure cracked. He saw the mother beneath the monarch, the woman who had spent 3 years mourning a daughter, she now nearly lost again. You saved her. Again. I was in the right place at the right time. Sam shrugged. It is what I do. The queen's hand reached out, touching his cheek with fingers that trembled slightly. You are more than you appear, Sam Mercer. My daughter was right about you. General Krothos approached, his earlier hostility tempered by what he had witnessed. Your Majesty, the assassins, their fighting style. It was not Valdorian. Sam rose to his feet, looking down at the bodies scattered across the chamber. No, it was human, or at least it was based on human techniques. Someone has been studying us, learning how we fight, and teaching those methods to your enemies. That is impossible. Humans have no contact with the wider galaxy. Not officially. Sam met the general's eyes. But your empire has been taking humans for experimentation for decades. How many of those prisoners escaped? How many were sold to other species? How many found their way into hands that saw them as resources to be exploited? The implications hung in the air, heavy with the weight of sins that the Valdorian Empire had preferred to forget. Queen Seraphis rose to her feet, her composure restored, her eyes hard with determination. We have a traitor in our midst. Someone who knew my daughter survived, who knew she was returning, who arranged this attack to finish what they started 3 years ago. General Krothos' voice was grim. The assassins had access codes to the inner palace. Only a handful of people possess such codes. The traitor must be among my senior staff. Or among my advisors. The queen's gaze swept the chamber, taking in the guards and servants who had gathered in the aftermath of the attack. Trust no one until we find the source of this betrayal. Sam stepped forward, aware that he was overstepping, but unable to remain silent. Your Majesty, during the attack, one of the assassins spoke to me. He said they do not surrender, they complete their missions, or die trying. That is not Valdorian philosophy. That is something else, something conditioned, trained into them until it replaced their survival instincts. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that whoever is behind this has resources beyond what you might expect. They are not just hiring mercenaries or turning officers with bribes. They are creating soldiers, programming them for specific purposes, treating them as weapons rather than people. Sam paused, choosing his next words carefully. I have seen this before. On Earth, we called it brainwashing. The process requires time, resources, and complete control over the subject. Whoever is doing this has been planning for years. The Queen was silent for a long moment, processing his words. Then she turned to General Krothos with an expression that made the massive Valdorian straighten to attention. I want a full investigation. Every access code to the inner palace traced. Every unusual communication in the past 3 years analyzed. Every officer and advisor with knowledge of my daughter's movements questioned. Her voice hardened, and the human stays at my daughter's side. If anyone can recognize these techniques again, it is him. Krothos looked like he wanted to argue, but something in the Queen's expression stopped him. As you command. The hours that followed the assassination attempt passed in a blur of investigations and interrogations. Sam found himself included in meetings that no human had ever attended, his insights sought by generals and advisors who had dismissed his species as primitives just days before. The evidence pointed in troubling directions. The assassins had entered through service corridors that were supposed to be sealed using codes that had been logged to routine maintenance requests. The requests themselves were untraceable, routed through systems that should have been secure but had been compromised by methods that even the Empire's best technicians could not identify. The head of palace security delivered the report with the defeated tone of a professional who had just discovered the magnitude of his failure. Someone has been inside our networks for years. They have access to everything. Personnel records, security protocols, even the royal family's private schedules. Lyrineth sat in on the briefing despite medical orders to rest her wounded arm, bound in regenerative wrappings that would heal the tissue over the coming days. Everything except the Queen's personal encryption. That is why I used it to send my signal. It was the only system I knew had not been compromised. General Krothos leaned forward, his earlier hostility towards Sam forgotten in the face of more immediate concerns. But how did you know? How did you know the other systems were vulnerable? Because when I was attacked 3 years ago, the enemy knew exactly where to find me. Lyrineth's voice was steady, but Sam caught the tremor beneath it. My course was classified at the highest level. Only a handful of people had access to that information, and yet they were waiting for me, positioned perfectly, to destroy my fleet and leave no witnesses. You suspected a traitor from the beginning. I knew there was a traitor. I just could not prove it. Her eyes swept the assembled officers, and I still cannot. Whoever is doing this is patient, careful, and deeply embedded in our power structure. They have been planning this for years, perhaps decades. The attack on my fleet was not an act of war. It was the culmination of a long campaign to destabilize our empire from within. Sam listened to the discussion, his mind working on patterns that the Valdorians might not see. He had spent 15 years studying this civilization, learning its weaknesses, cataloging its vulnerabilities. He had done it out of grief and anger, planning a revenge that he had never quite managed to execute. Now that knowledge was serving a different purpose. May I speak? He directed the question to Queen Seraphis, who had been silent throughout the briefing. The Queen nodded. During my time on Nexus 7, I noticed inconsistencies in your supply chains. Ships arriving at unusual times, cargo manifests that did not match their declared contents. Personnel transfers that seemed random, but followed patterns when you looked closely enough. Sam pulled up a display on the briefing room's central screen, showing data he had collected over years of quiet observation. I thought it was smuggling at first, maybe some local corruption, but the patterns are too consistent, too widespread. Someone has been using your legitimate shipping networks to move resources without detection. General Krothos studied the display with narrowed eyes. You gathered this intelligence as a maintenance worker. I gathered it as a survivor. When you have spent 3 years in a Valdorian prison, you learn to pay attention to details that others miss. Sam highlighted a cluster of data points. These shipping anomalies center on 3 systems. All of them are near your border with the Korthax Alliance. All of them have been the site of increased military activity over the past year. The Queen's voice was soft, dangerous. The Korthax. You believe they are behind this. I believe someone wants you to think the Korthax are behind this. The attackers last night fought with human techniques, not Korthax methods. The evidence is designed to point toward your external enemies, but the actual infiltration came from inside. Sam paused, letting the implications sink in. Someone in your own government is working with the Korthax, feeding them information, helping them prepare for something big. And that someone has been doing it for a very long time. Silence filled the briefing room. Sam watched the faces around him, looking for the telltale signs of guilt or fear that might betray the traitor in their midst. Most of the officers showed nothing but shock and concern, but one face caught his attention. Lord Vexar, the advisor who had questioned Lyraneth's description of hostile space, had gone very still. His expression was perfectly composed, exactly the same as every other Valdorian in the room. But his hands resting on the table before him had clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles had gone pale. Sam filed the observation away, adding it to the growing body of evidence in his mind. He could not accuse a high-ranking advisor without proof, not when his own position was so precarious. But he could watch and wait and be ready when the moment came. Lyraneth caught up with him in the corridor outside the briefing room, her wounded arm cradled against her chest. You saw something in there. It was not a question. Something you did not share with the others. Sam glanced around, ensuring they were alone. Your Lord Vexar. He reacted to my analysis in a way the others did not. Vexar has been my mother's advisor since before I was born. He is loyal to the Empire. Maybe. Or maybe he has been planning his downfall for longer than anyone realizes. Sam met her eyes. I am not accusing him. I do not have enough evidence for that, but I am suggesting that we watch him closely. Lyraneth was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. My mother trusts him completely. If he is the traitor revealing him, we'll destroy her. Better destroyed by truth than killed by lies. The princess looked at him with an expression that Sam could not quite read. You are a strange creature, Sam Mercer. You speak like a warrior, but think like a philosopher. I am just an old man who has seen too much. Sam shrugged. Philosophers and warriors both end up in the same place eventually. The difference is just in how they get there. A ghost of a smile crossed Lyraneth's face. My father used to say something similar. He was a philosopher at heart, though he led armies when duty demanded it. What happened to him? He died when I was young, a sickness that our medicine could not cure. Her voice carried old grief worn smooth by time. My mother has ruled alone ever since, carrying burdens that were meant to be shared. That explains a lot about her. It explains everything about her. Lyraneth touched Sam's arm with her uninjured hand. Thank you. For saving me, yes, but also for being honest. Most people tell my mother what she wants to hear. You tell her what she needs to know. I have never been very good at telling people what they want to hear. It is one of my many character flaws. Perhaps it is your greatest strength. She withdrew her hand and stepped back. Get some rest, Sam Mercer. I suspect we will need your strength again before this is over. She walked away down the corridor, leaving Sam alone with his thoughts and his suspicions, and the growing certainty that the war they were fighting had only just begun. He requested a private audience with Queen Seraphis the following morning, half expecting to be refused. To his surprise, the summons came within the hour. The Queen received him in her private study, a smaller space than the throne room, but no less impressive. The walls were lined with records of Valdorian history, crystalline storage devices holding memories and documents that stretched back thousands of years. Seraphis sat behind a desk of polished stone, her expression guarded, but curious. You have something to tell me. Again, not a question. The Queen had the habit of speaking in certainties. I have a theory, Your Majesty, one that you will not want to hear. I have spent 200 years listening to things I did not want to hear. That is the burden of rule. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Speak. Sam sat organizing his thoughts. The traitor in your court has been working against you for at least 15 years, probably longer. They have access to your highest security systems, knowledge of your family's movements and connections to both the Korthax Alliance and human trafficking networks. Continue. 3 years ago, they arranged the attack on your daughter's fleet. The goal was not just to kill the princess, but to break your spirit, to remove your heir and leave you without hope, so that when the real attack came, you would be too weak to resist. The real attack. The Korthax are massing forces near your border. Your military knows this, but they believe it is a defensive buildup, a response to increased tensions. I believe it is the opening move of an invasion coordinated with the traitor inside your government. Queen Seraphis' expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. You have evidence of this. Circumstantial evidence only. The shipping anomalies I showed in the briefing. The fighting techniques used by the assassins. The timing of events over the past 3 years. Sam leaned forward. And one more thing. When I mentioned the Korthax connection in the briefing, Lord Vexar's reaction was different from everyone else's. Not shock or concern. Control. The reaction of someone who already knew what I was going to say. Vexar. The Queen's voice was flat, unreadable. He has served me faithfully for 50 years. The best traders always do. They build trust over decades, waiting for the moment when that trust can be exploited. Sam met her eyes without flinching. I am not asking you to arrest him, Your Majesty. I am asking you to watch him. Let him think he is unsuspected while we gather the evidence we need. And if you are wrong, then I am wrong and you have lost nothing but a few days of caution. Sam paused. But if I am right and you do nothing, you will lose everything. The Queen was silent for a long time, her ancient eyes studying Sam's face, as if searching for something she could not name. Finally, she spoke. My daughter trusts you. She has never trusted easily, not since her father died. That means something to me. She rose from her desk, moving to stand before one of the crystalline storage walls. When I was young, I believed that strength meant never showing weakness. I built an empire on that belief, crushing enemies and demanding absolute loyalty from my subjects. I thought I was building something eternal. She turned to face him, and for the first time, Sam saw the weight of 2 centuries pressing down on her shoulders. But empires do not fall from without. They fall from within, from rot that spreads unseen until the foundations crumble. If what you say is true, then that rot has been growing in my court for longer than you have been alive. Her voice hardened. And I will cut it out, whatever the cost. Even if it means losing someone you trust. Trust is a luxury I can no longer afford. The Queen walked to her desk and pressed a control that Sam did not recognize. I am ordering a war council for tomorrow. Full military readiness under the pretense of responding to the Korthax buildup. Lord Vexar will be there. So will you. Me, Your Majesty. You have spent 15 years studying my people. You know our weaknesses better than most of my generals. And more importantly, you have no loyalty to any faction in my court. Her eyes met his. You are the only one I can be certain is not the traitor. Sam absorbed this understanding, the magnitude of what she was offering. I am honored, Your Majesty, but I am also just one man, old and tired and far from home. My daughter returned from the dead with an old, tired man at her side. Perhaps that is exactly what this empire needs. The Queen's voice softened slightly. Your son asked you not to hate us. Help me save my people, Sam Mercer, and perhaps you will find that his wish was not impossible after all. Sam thought of Marcus, of the boy who had believed that understanding could bridge any gap. He thought of the promise he had made in a prison cell 15 years ago, the promise he had been running from ever since. I will do what I can, Your Majesty, for my son's sake, and for yours. The Queen nodded once, a gesture of dismissal and acceptance combined. As Sam left her study, he felt the weight of something shifting in his chest. For 15 years, he had been a ghost drifting through the empire that had destroyed his family, waiting for a purpose he could not name. Now finally he had found it. The War Council chamber hummed with attention as officers and advisors took their positions around the massive holographic display. Sam stood near the back, his presence tolerated but not welcomed by most of the Valdorians who filled the space. General Krothos had positioned himself at the Queen's right hand, his massive frame casting shadows across the tactical projections that flickered to life above the table. Queen Seraphis entered last, her daughter at her side. Larineth's wounded arm had healed enough to allow movement, though Sam noticed she still favored it when she thought no one was watching. The princess caught his eye across the chamber and gave an almost imperceptible nod. General Krothos activated the main display, and suddenly the chamber was filled with the ghostly images of warships beyond counting. The Korthax Alliance has assembled the largest fleet in their history. Our scouts estimate over 2,000 capital ships supported by countless smaller vessels. They have positioned themselves along our border in what they claim is a defensive formation. Lord Vexar's voice carried skepticism that seemed genuine. Defensive. No one assembles such a force for defense. Sam watched the advisor carefully, looking for any sign of the guilt he suspected. Vexar's face revealed nothing, his composure as perfect as ever. Either the man was innocent or he was a better actor than anyone Sam had ever encountered. Krothos continued, his voice heavy with the admission. Our own forces are insufficient to meet them in direct combat. Years of declining military budgets have left us with barely 300 capital ships. If they attack, we will be overwhelmed. Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Sam saw fear in faces that had been trained to show nothing, the fear of those who understood they were facing annihilation. Larineth stepped forward, her voice cutting through the whispers. Then we do not meet them in direct combat. We fight differently. We use their size against them. One of the younger admirals spoke up, his tone carrying condescension. With respect, Highness, there is no tactic that can overcome such numerical superiority. The mathematics of warfare are absolute. The mathematics of your warfare, perhaps. Larineth turned to Sam. Tell them what you told me on the shuttle, about how humans fight. Every eye in the chamber turned towards Sam. He felt the weight of their attention, the skepticism and hostility of beings who had spent their lives believing his species was beneath notice. For a moment, he considered staying silent, letting the Valdorians face their fate without interference. Then he thought of Marcus, and he stepped forward. Your fleets fight in formation. Predictable patterns established over centuries of tradition. You value honor over efficiency, ceremony over results. Sam moved toward the holographic display, his fingers tracing the enemy fleet positions. The Korthax know this. They have studied your tactics, your deployment patterns, your command structures. They know exactly how you will respond to their attack because you have responded the same way for 1,000 years. General Krothos' voice carried warning. And you propose we abandon our traditions, fight without honor. I propose you survive. Sam met the general's eyes without flinching. Honor means nothing to the dead. And if you fight this battle the way you have always fought, you will all be dead within a week. Silence fell across the chamber. Sam could feel the anger building, the outrage at a human daring to criticize Valdorian military doctrine. But he could also see doubt in some faces, the recognition that perhaps the old ways would not serve in this new crisis. Queen Seraphis' voice cut through the tension. Speak your strategy. We will hear what you have to say. Sam took a breath and began. The Korthax expect you to form your fleets into defensive lines, protecting the approaches to your core worlds. They will advance in overwhelming force, crush your formations one by one, and push inexorably toward your capital. He manipulated the display showing the standard Valdorian defensive deployment. This is what they want you to do. This is what their entire strategy is built around. So instead, you scatter your forces, break your fleets into smaller groups, fast and mobile. You do not try to hold territory. You strike at supply lines, communication nodes, isolated squadrons. You make them bleed for every parsec they advance. Admiral Vexus, one of the older officers, spoke with grudging recognition. Guerrilla warfare. Your species has used such tactics against superior forces before. We have used them because they work. The enemy cannot be everywhere at once. Their massive fleet becomes a liability requiring constant supply and coordination. Every ship they lose cannot be easily replaced. Every delay costs them momentum and morale. Lord Vexar interjected, his voice smooth with concern. In our civilian populations, your strategy abandons them to enemy occupation. Temporarily. The goal is not to hold ground, but to break the enemy's will to fight. Make the cost of victory so high that they choose negotiation over continued war. Sam turned to face Vexar directly. Unless you believe surrender is preferable. Something flickered in the advisor's eyes there and gone so quickly that Sam might have imagined it. I believe in protecting our people. Your strategy offers them only suffering. My strategy offers them survival. Yours offers them slavery under Korthak's rule. The chamber erupted in argument, officers shouting positions and counterpositions, while the Queen watched in silence. Sam stepped back, letting the storm rage around him, his eyes never leaving Lord Vexar. The advisor had recovered his composure, but Sam had seen enough. The man was not merely cautious or conservative. He was actively working to undermine any strategy that might succeed against the Korthax. The question was how to prove it without alerting him to the suspicion. Queen Seraphis rose from her height and the chamber fell silent instantly. We will implement the human strategy. General Krothos began dispersing our fleets according to his recommendations. Admiral Vexus, you will coordinate the mobile strike groups. Lord Vexar stepped forward, his voice carefully modulated. Your Majesty, I must counsel caution. This strategy is untested, proposed by an outsider with no understanding of our culture or capabilities. This outsider saved my daughter's life twice in 3 days. The Queen's voice carried ice. His understanding seems quite adequate to me. Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect. Vexar bowed, his face a mask of deference. I only wish to ensure we have considered all options before committing to such a radical course. Your concern is noted and dismissed. The Queen turned to address the full council. We have 3 days before the Korthax fleet reaches optimal attack position. Use that time well. Dismissed. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and paranoia. Sam found himself at the center of a military reorganization that would have seemed impossible just a week before human tactics being adapted to Valdorian technology and personnel. The officers who had dismissed him as a primitive now sought his advice on deployment patterns and engagement protocols. General Krothos proved to be an unexpected ally. The massive Valdorian had watched Sam fight during the assassination attempt, had seen the brutal efficiency that lay beneath the old man's tired exterior. That single moment had earned a respect that decades of argument could never have achieved. The general made the observation during a late-night planning session when exhaustion had stripped away the formality that usually characterized Valdorian discourse. You fight like someone who expects to die. I fight like someone who has already died. Sam did not look up from the tactical display he was studying. Everything after Marcus is borrowed time. Your son, my wife, my world. Everything that made life worth living ended in a prison cell 15 years ago. Sam finally met the general's eyes. What remains is just a man going through the motions, waiting for a purpose worth dying for. And you have found that purpose here among the people who destroyed your family. I have found people worth saving. That is more than I expected when I followed that signal into the void. Krothos was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he extended his hand in the Valdorian gesture of warrior respect. Whatever happens in the battle to come, Sam Mercer, you have earned your place among us. I was wrong to dismiss your kind as weak. Sam clasped the general's forearm, completing the ritual. You were not entirely wrong. Most humans are weak, but so are most Valdorians, most Korthax, most beings of any species. Strength is not about what you are. It is about what you choose to become. The general nodded slowly, accepting the wisdom in those words. I will remember that, and I will teach it to those who serve under me. It was perhaps the closest thing to friendship Sam had experienced since losing his family. He treasured it all the more because he knew it might not survive the days ahead. The Korthax attacked on the morning of the 3rd day. Their fleet emerged from hyperspace in waves, thousands of ships materializing across the border like a tide of steel and fire. The scale of the assault dwarfed anything the Valdorian Empire had faced in centuries, a force designed not merely to defeat, but to annihilate. Sam watched the attack unfold from the command center of the Imperial flagship, surrounded by officers executing the strategy he had helped design. The Valdorian fleets did not form defensive lines as the enemy expected. Instead, they scattered, breaking into dozens of mobile groups that struck and vanished before the Korthax could bring their superior numbers to bear. The first hours of battle were chaos. Ships died on both sides, flashes of light marking the end of crews who would never see their homes again. But the Valdorian losses were sustainable, manageable, while the Korthax found themselves chasing shadows across a battlefield that refused to stay still. General Krothos studied the tactical display with fierce satisfaction. Enemy formation breaking. They are splitting their forces to pursue our strike groups. As expected, Sam allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Now we make them pay for that mistake. The counterattacks began. Valdorian squadrons emerging from hidden positions to savage the divided enemy forces. Ships that had seemed invincible in massed formation proved vulnerable when isolated. Their coordination disrupted their supporting elements too far away to help. But the Korthaks were not fools. Their commanders adapted, pulling back their scattered forces, reforming into tighter formations that sacrificed mobility for mutual protection. The initial advantage began to slip away as the enemy learned from their mistakes. Larineth pointed to the massive vessel at the center of the Korthak's fleet, a dreadnought larger than anything the Valdorians could field. They are consolidating around their command ship. If they complete the reformation, our hit-and-run tactics will become ineffective. Then we need to prevent that reformation. Sam studied the display, his mind racing through possibilities. We need to take out their command structure. Cut off the head, and the body will thrash blindly. The command ship is too well protected. We cannot get close enough to threaten it. Not with a conventional attack. Sam's voice had gone quiet, thoughtful. But what if we did not try to destroy it? What if we just cracked it open? The plan came together in his mind, terrible and elegant in its simplicity. A small ship, fast and maneuverable, could slip through the chaos of battle to reach the enemy flagship. A direct collision at the right point, combined with carefully placed explosives, could breach the shields and expose the command deck to vacuum. It was a suicide mission. The pilot would never survive. Sam looked around the command center at the officers and crew who had become, against all expectations, something like comrades. He looked at Lyraneth, who had survived so much and deserved to see her empire secured. He looked at the tactical displays showing the desperate struggle that would determine the fate of millions. And he knew what he had to do. I need a shuttle, something fast with manual navigation capability. Lyraneth's head snapped toward him, understanding dawning in her eyes. No, Sam, you cannot. Someone has to, and I am the logical choice. He met her gaze steadily. I have nothing to lose and everything to give. My son asked me to teach your people, to help them understand humanity. What better lesson than this? There must be another way. There is always another way, but not always a better one. Sam reached out and touched her face, a gesture of tenderness that surprised them both. You came back from the dead, Lyraneth. You survived 3 years in the void because you refused to give up. Now it is my turn to refuse. Moisture gathered in the princess's eyes, but she did not let the tears fall. Valdorian discipline held even in the face of grief. My mother will want to speak with you. I know, but there is no time. Sam turned toward the shuttle bay, his steps steady despite the trembling in his heart. Tell her that I understand why her people did what they did to Marcus. Fear makes monsters of us all. But her daughter showed me that monsters can become something better. That is a gift worth dying for. He walked away before she could respond, before his resolve could weaken. The shuttle bay was chaos crews preparing fighters and transports for the desperate battle raging outside. Sam commandeered a small courier vessel, its speed and maneuverability perfect for what he had planned. As he powered up the engines, a communication channel crackled to life. Queen Seraphis' voice filled the cockpit, heavy with emotion she could not entirely suppress. Sam Mercer, my daughter tells me you intend to sacrifice yourself. Your Majesty, I apologize for not seeking permission. Permission would have been denied. A pause waited with things unsaid, but understanding is given freely. You do this for your son. I do this for everyone's sons, for every child who might grow up in a galaxy where your people and mine have learned to see each other as equals. Sam's hands moved across the controls, preparing for launch. Marcus believed that was possible. I am choosing to believe it too. Then go with the blessing of the eternal throne, Sam Mercer, and know that whatever happens, your name will be remembered in the halls of our ancestors. That is more than I ever expected, Your Majesty, more than I ever deserved. The channel closed and Sam launched his shuttle into the inferno of battle. The journey to the enemy flagship was a nightmare of fire and steel. Sam flew by instinct, decades of training, merging with the desperate clarity that came when death was certain. Korthak's fighters swarmed around him, their weapons scorching his shields, but his shuttle was too small, too fast, too unpredictable for them to destroy. He thought of Marcus as he flew, remembering the boy's face in the moments before death. Those eyes had held no fear, no anger, only a quiet certainty that the universe was better than it appeared. Sam had spent 15 years doubting that certainty. Now in the final moments of his life, he chose to embrace it. The Corthax command ship loomed before him, its massive bulk blocking out the stars. Sam identified his target, a junction in the shield array, where a direct impact would cause a cascade failure. He armed the explosives he had rigged to the shuttle's reactor enough firepower to crack the ship open like an egg. A communication signal cut through the static of battle. Larineth's voice transmitted from the Imperial flagship. Sam, before you go, there is something you should hear. Larineth, there is no time. There is time for this. Her voice cracked slightly. When I was hiding in that wreckage, waiting to die, I found something in the ship's database. A message from 15 years ago recorded but never sent. It was addressed to you. Sam's hands froze on the controls. What? It was from Marcus. He recorded it the night before he died, hoping someone would find it and deliver it to you. The message was corrupted, fragmented, but we managed to recover part of it. Static filled the channel, and then a voice that Sam had not heard in 15 years spoke into his ear. Young, tired, but filled with a warmth that time could not diminish. Dad, if you are hearing this, then I am probably gone. I wanted you to know that I am not afraid. I know you will blame yourself, but please do not. You did everything you could. You always did everything you could. Sam's vision blurred with tears he could not afford to shed. His shuttle continued its deadly approach, the enemy flagship growing larger with every second. I know you will want to hate them for what happened to me, but Dad, hatred is just another kind of prison. I do not want you to spend the rest of your life locked up because of me. Find something to believe in. Find someone to protect. Find a reason to keep living that does not involve revenge. The words struck Sam like physical blows, each one unlocking doors he had kept sealed for 15 years. He heard his son's voice and felt for the first time since that terrible day in the prison, so that Marcus was truly with him. I love you, Dad. I always have, and I always will. Whatever happens next, remember that. And remember that you are stronger than you think. You taught me that. Now I am teaching it back to you. The message ended, leaving Sam alone with the sound of his own ragged breathing and the growing thunder of the approaching enemy ship. Larineth's voice returned, gentle with understanding. He loved you, Sam, and he would be proud of what you are doing. He would probably call me an idiot for flying into certain death. That too, but he would be proud anyway. Sam laughed, a sound that surprised him with its genuine warmth. Tell your mother something for me. Tell her that I forgive everything. The prison, Marcus, all of it. Tell her that her daughter helped me understand what my son was trying to say all along. I will tell her, and I will make sure your name is never forgotten. That is all anyone can ask. Sam's finger hovered over the final control. Goodbye, Larineth. It has been an honor. The honor was mine, Sam Mercer. The honor was mine. He cut the channel and focused on his target. The shield junction was directly ahead, glowing with the energy that protected the enemy command deck. In seconds, he would impact. In seconds, everything would end. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A Corthax fighter emerged from behind the command ship, its weapons already firing. Sam's shuttle shuddered as shots tore through its hull systems, failing in cascading waves. The collision course shifted his trajectory, skewing away from the optimal impact point. He would still hit the ship, but he would miss the shield junction. Sam fought the controls, trying to correct his course, but the damage was too severe. His shuttle was dying around him, and there was nothing he could do to save the mission. Then a voice crackled over his emergency channel. Larineth, her tone hard with determination. Sam, hold your course. I am coming. What? No, stay back. You missed the junction, but I will not. When you hit, their shields will flicker. I will be right behind you, aimed at the weak point you exposed. Larineth, that is suicide. No, that is finishing what you started. Her voice softened for just a moment. You showed me that survival is not always the highest goal. Sometimes there are things worth dying for. My people, my mother, the future you helped me see. Those things are worth my life. Your mother needs you. The Empire needs its heir. The Empire needs to survive, and it will because of what we do today. My mother will understand. She is a queen. She knows the cost of victory. Sam's shuttle screamed toward the enemy flagship, flames erupting from its wounds. Through the viewport, he could see Lyraneth's fighter closing from another angle, perfectly positioned to exploit the gap his impact would create. I did not save you so you could throw your life away. You saved me so I could choose how to spend it. This is my choice, Sam. Honor it. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, remembering Marcus's words about finding something to believe in, someone to protect. He had found both in the most unlikely place imaginable, and now he was about to lose them again. But perhaps that was the lesson. Love was not about holding on. It was about letting go when the moment demanded it. Together then, his voice was steady despite the chaos around him. On my mark, full acceleration. Together, the enemy flagship filled his viewport, its hull rushing up to meet him. Sam took one last breath, thinking of his son, of the princess, who had become something like a daughter of the queen who had given him a chance he never expected. Now, Jen, his shuttle struck the enemy ship in a blaze of fire and steel. The impact was everything he had hoped for, shields flickering as the explosion tore through the hull. For one perfect moment, the massive dreadnought was vulnerable. And through that vulnerability, Lyraneth's fighter screamed toward the exposed command deck. Sam's consciousness fragmented as his shuttle disintegrated around him. He felt pain, brief and overwhelming, followed by a strange sensation of floating. Through dying eyes, he saw Lyraneth's fighter penetrate the enemy's shields, saw the secondary explosions that rippled through the command ship, saw the beginning of the end for the Korthax invasion. Then darkness took him, and Sam Mercer knew no more. He woke to the sound of voices and the smell of antiseptic. For a long moment, he could not remember where he was or how he had gotten there. Then memory returned in a flood of fire and sacrifice and impossible hope. A hand pressed against his chest, preventing him from rising. Easy. You have been unconscious for 3 days. Your body needs time to heal. Sam opened his eyes and found Princess Lyraneth looking down at him. Her face was pale, marked with healing burns, but her eyes were alive with a tree that seemed almost too bright to bear. His voice came out as a croak, his throat raw from disuse. You are alive. So are you, against all probability and medical wisdom. She smiled, and Sam saw tears glistening in her eyes. Your shuttle broke apart on impact, but the emergency beacon survived. Our recovery teams found you floating in the wreckage, barely alive but breathing. The battle, the Korthax, defeated. When their command ship exploded, their fleet fell into chaos. Our mobile groups picked them apart over the following hours. The survivors have retreated beyond our borders. Lyraneth's grip tightened on his hand. We won, Sam. Because of you. Sam closed his eyes, letting the relief wash over him. He had expected to die. He had made peace with death. And yet here he was alive, surrounded by people who had become precious to him in ways he never anticipated. The name emerged from his memory like a splinter, working its way to the surface. Vexar, the traitor. Captured trying to flee during the battle, he had prepared a shuttle to rendezvous with the Korthax fleet. Lyraneth's voice hardened. He has confessed to everything. The attack on my fleet 3 years ago, the assassination attempts, his decades of work undermining our empire from within. He will face justice. Good. Sam felt exhaustion pulling at him, the weight of his injuries demanding rest. Your mother, waiting to see you. She has barely left the medical wing since you were brought in. Lyraneth hesitated, then leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead in a gesture that bridged the gap between their species. Thank you, Sam Mercer, for everything. Thank Marcus. The words came out slurred as sleep reclaimed him. He was right all along. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and revelation. Sam learned that his shuttle's emergency systems had activated in the final moments before impact, sealing him in a protective cocoon that had kept him alive through the explosion and the void that followed. The odds of survival had been astronomical, the kind of chance that made even hardened military officers speak of miracles. Queen Seraphis visited him on the 4th day when he was finally strong enough to sit up and receive her properly. She came alone without guards or advisors, and for a long time she simply stood at his bedside, studying him with eyes that held depths he could not fathom. You should have died. Her voice carried no accusation, only wonder. So I am told. Apparently the universe had other plans. Or perhaps your son did. The queen moved to sit in the chair beside his bed, her usual formality set aside. I have been thinking about what you said before the battle, about forgiveness. about your son's final wishes. Marcus was wiser than I ever gave him credit for. He was wise because he had a father who taught him to be. Seraphis reached out and took Sam's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a week ago. I have ruled this empire for 200 years. I have made decisions that cost millions of lives, sacrificed individuals for the greater good, hardened my heart against the suffering of those I deemed lesser. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself it was strength. And now I understand that true strength lies not in the walls we build, but in the bridges we create. She squeezed his hand gently. You came to us as a victim, Sam Mercer, a man with every reason to seek our destruction. Instead, you chose to save us. That is a gift I do not know how to repay. You have already repaid it. Sam met her eyes steadily. You gave me back my purpose. You gave me people worth fighting for. And you showed me that Marcus was right to believe in the possibility of understanding. The queen was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. When you are recovered, I would like you to remain here, not as a guest or a curiosity, but as an advisor, a bridge between our peoples. She paused, and something almost like vulnerability flickered across her ancient features. And perhaps if you are willing, as something like family. Sam thought of Marcus, of the son he had lost, and the daughter he had found in the most unlikely of places. He thought of the photograph still pressed against his heart, the image of a boy who had believed that love could transcend any boundary. I would be honored, Your Majesty. Seraphis, when we are alone, you may call me Seraphis. Then I would be honored, Seraphis. The queen smiled, an expression that transformed her face and hinted at the woman she had been before centuries of rule had hardened her heart. Welcome to the family, Sam Mercer. May the stars witness our bond. 1 year later, Sam stood in the crystal gardens of the Imperial Palace, watching as a statue was unveiled before an assembly of thousands. The figure carved in the gleaming stone was young, barely more than a child, his face lifted toward the stars with an expression of wonder and hope. Marcus Mercer, the inscription read, who taught his father to forgive and through him taught an empire to understand. Lyraneth stood beside Sam, her arm linked through his in a gesture of support that had become natural over the months since the battle. Behind them, Queen Seraphis watched the ceremony with eyes that glistened but did not weep. General Krothos stood among the honor guard, his massive frame bowed in respect for the human boy whose memory had changed his understanding of strength. He would have loved this. Sam's voice was rough with emotion. Not the statue, but what it represents. The idea that his life meant something beyond our little family. His life changed the fate of a galaxy. Lyraneth squeezed his arm. That is more than most beings can claim regardless of how long they live. Sam looked at the statue, at the face of a boy who had been taken too soon, and felt something he had not experienced in 15 years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning that made the pain bearable. Lyraneth withdrew a small device from her pocket, a crystalline storage unit of the kind Valdorians use to preserve their most precious memories. I have something for you. We recovered more of Marcus's message. The technicians worked for months to restore it. I thought you might want to hear the rest. Sam took the device with trembling hands. For a moment, he could not bring himself to activate it, afraid of what he might hear, afraid of how it might change the fragile peace he had finally achieved. Then he thought of his son's wisdom, of the boy who had faced death without fear, because he believed in something greater than himself. Marcus would not have wanted him to be afraid. He activated the recording. His son's voice filled the garden, young and tired, but filled with the warmth that Sam remembered so perfectly. Dad, I know you probably think I am too young to understand what is happening. Maybe I am, but I understand one thing. You taught me that being brave does not mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Sam closed his eyes, letting the grief flow without shame. I am scared, Dad. I do not want to die. But if I do, I want you to know that I am not angry. Not at you, not at them, not at anyone. I am just grateful. Grateful for every moment we had together. Grateful for everything you taught me. Grateful for the chance to be your son. The recording crackled degradation from years of damage. So if this is goodbye, then let it be a good one. Go live, Dad. Go love. Go find new people to protect and new things to believe in. That is what I want for you. That is my last wish. The message ended, leaving silence in its wake. Sam stood motionless, the weight of 15 years finally lifting from his shoulders. Beside him, Lyraneth wept openly, and behind them, Queen Seraphis bowed her head in respect for a human child she had never met, but whose wisdom had changed everything. Lyraneth's voice was barely a whisper. He would be proud of you. Sam looked at the statue, at the gardens, at the alien princess who had become something like a daughter, and the queen who had become something like family. He thought of Marcus, of the boy who had believed that understanding could bridge any gap. A smile crossed his face, the first genuine smile in longer than he could remember. No, he would say, I finally stopped being stubborn and listened to him. Laughter rippled through the assembly, human and Valdorian sharing a moment of joy that transcended the boundaries between their species. And in the crystal gardens of an alien palace surrounded by a family he had never expected to find, Sam Mercer finally understood what his son had been trying to tell him all along. Love was not about holding on. It was about letting go of everything that did not matter so you could embrace everything that did. The stars shone down on the statue of a human boy, and somewhere across the vast emptiness of space, Sam could have sworn he heard his son laughing with joy. 3 photographs now sat on the table beside Sam's bed. The first showed Marcus at 10 years old grinning in front of their house in Amarillo. The second showed Lyraneth in her ceremonial armor, standing tall and proud on the day of her official reinstatement as heir to the throne. The third showed Queen Seraphis captured in a rare moment of genuine laughter during a private dinner that had somehow become a weekly tradition. Beneath them in Sam's careful handwriting, there were words that had taken him 15 years to understand. Family is not about blood. Family is about who stays when everyone else is gone. And for the first time since losing his son, Sam Mercer knew that he was finally home.